In today's video, I'll be installing a new CCTV setup using these cameras from Reolink and a Blue Iris NVR. If you've seen my previous videos, you'll have seen that I already have a CCTV setup, and it's based around UniFi Protect. I have a CloudKey Gen 2 Plus acting as an NVR and a few different cameras. And it works really well. However, I've kind of got a few reasons that I want to replace it, and in this video we'll talk about those and take a look at the new system. So as you'll probably know, I live in a flat, or apartment if you're in the US, or condo because it's privately owned, not rented from a company. Anyway, I live in a flat, so I don't really have any outdoor space, so all my cameras are indoors. Which seems a bit of a weird thing to have, but I quite like it. I quite often travel away for a few days at a time, and it's just nice to be able to check in on the place while I'm away. Additionally, if I'm say dog sitting, which I do from time to time, and I need to nip out and need to leave the dog behind, I can just check on the cameras and just check on them, which is quite nice to have. And if you've seen my other videos as well, you'll have seen that these cameras are currently integrated with my alarm system, so that when my alarm is disarmed and I'm at home, the cameras are physically powered off, so they don't record while I'm at home. Because even though I'm the only person that can access the footage and it records locally, I still don't want to be sitting recorded all the time. And that setup works really well, but I've had an idea that I really want to try out, and it involves using these PTZ cameras. And what these are cameras that can pan, tilt and zoom, so they can rotate, they can zoom in and out, and they can move their lens around. And my plan with this is, rather than my current setup where I physically cut power to the cameras for privacy, with these I can actually have the cameras physically turn away and face a wall when I'm at home. And this should be quite good, because even though I know that my cameras are cut off when I'm at home and I can tell guests that, it's not great having to tell guests, yes, there's a camera pointing at you, but it's off. And if I've say got guests staying over sleeping on the couch, it's not great that they'd be lying on the couch with a camera lens literally pointing at them, even if it is turned off. So with these, I can instead have them completely turn away, and it's completely obvious the camera isn't filming you because it literally can't, because it's pointing at a wall. So I really want to try that out. But this isn't really going to be possible with UniFi Protect, because as good as UniFi Protect is, it's a closed system that only works with UniFi cameras. And UniFi just don't really have any kind of decent PTZ cameras that would work for me in my particular environment. Additionally, when it comes to cameras, I wanted something that was more of a kind of pet camera, baby monitor camera type idea, rather than a serious looking professional CCTV camera bolted to the ceiling in the corner of a room. That's because, while the current UniFi cameras do look okay, they do look quite big and bulky and quite obtrusive. And I don't want it to look like a place that needs to have sort of indoor CCTV surveillance and make it look like I'm in a really high crime area, or I'm expecting something bad to happen inside. Whereas these cameras are a bit more friendly looking, they're like little pet cameras. They can sit on a shelf or on top of a cabinet and just sit there out the way, and they look a bit nicer to have in a home. These are the sort of things you kind of expect to see in someone's house. What you don't expect to see is a massive CCTV camera screwed to the ceiling in the corner of a room. So I felt these were a nicer looking option. And in particular, these Reolink E1 zoom cameras have a few features that will be really, really good for my setup, so we'll take a look at them in a second. So that's the cameras out the way, but what about the NVR? Well, of course, the more common option is just to go out and buy a black box NVR type solution. And while personally I don't really have huge privacy concerns about those, because I lock everything down at the network level so the NVR wouldn't be able to connect out to the internet, I understand that lots of people don't like that. There's a lot of privacy concerns around NVRs from the likes of Hikvision, Dahua, Uniview, those kind of companies. And ultimately, a lot of other NVRs from other brands are ultimately still manufactured by those. So I wanted to take a look at a solution that was completely different to that. I also wanted a solution that was reasonably scalable, so that even though here I only have 3 cameras, I wanted a solution that I could get familiar with, so if I needed to do an install with many more cameras or high resolution cameras, I wanted a much higher performance system, it would scale up to that. There's a few options around there. There's PC-based solutions such as Blue Iris and Frigate, which basically run on a regular PC, and you can just install those on a PC, and that PC will work as an NVR. The other option that I considered was using a NAS from the likes of Synology or QNAP, because many of those do actually have built-in NVR functionality. And the good thing with a NAS is you can get pretty large units, you can get ones with loads of disks, you can scale it up quite nicely, and those are generally from companies that have a pretty good privacy track record, and people seem pretty confident in using those. Ultimately, I settled on Blue Iris for a few different reasons. The NAS-based solutions looked really good, and I was about to go for that. However, it's only really available on the higher-end NASes. The lower-end NASes I generally find, at least with Synology, are ARM-based and don't support it. So you need to go to the slightly higher-end NASes that have Intel CPUs, so they cost a little bit more. The NASes also generally have 3.5-inch hard drive support, so they're physically larger, whereas I want something that I can fit on a 1U rack shelf in my hall cupboard network cabinet. On top of that, the NASs don't really have completely unlimited NVR support. Generally speaking, they have some sort of camera limit. In the case of Synology, it's 2 cameras out of the box, and you then need to pay for additional licenses to unlock additional cameras. Whereas Blue Iris, yes, it's commercial software, but it only costs about £50 for a license, and that allows, I think, up to 64 cameras or something. So with Blue Iris, you don't need to keep paying to add additional cameras, and I can run it on a device that's a much better form factor for my needs. Frigate's another option, and it does seem pretty good, and it is free, but looking at comparisons, people just tended to say that Blue Iris was a bit better, so I thought I may as well go for it. So what we'll do now is we'll go in, take a look at the cameras, get one out of the box, take a look at the hardware, then we'll take a look at the NVR and talk about what we'll be building, and then we'll get this all set up and get it installed. So first up, let's take a look at one of the cameras. And as you can see, I've gone for the Reolink E1 Zoom. And these cameras are pretty nice. They're 5 megapixel, which is pretty good resolution in the overall scheme of things, and they're ONVIF compliant. ONVIF is a standard for cameras, that if you've got an ONVIF compliant camera and an ONVIF compliant NVR, they'll work together. And it allows kind of interoperability between a bunch of stuff. And that's what this camera supports. So I can easily use this with Blue Iris or lots of other ONVIF compliant NVRs. Not all Reolink cameras seem to be ONVIF compliant, so you do need to be quite careful and make sure you go with one that is. In that case, the E1 Zoom is. We'll take it out of the box now and take a look, because the other really good thing with this is it also has built-in Ethernet. So whereas most of these little PTZ type Wi-Fi cameras or type cameras are generally only Wi-Fi cameras, these ones do have Ethernet, so I can hardwire them back. Be prepared, be Reolink. Okay, what on earth comes in here? Presumably it's just an instruction manual. Oh, okay. Instruction manual and the stickers that you can stick around and show everyone what particular brand of surveillance you have. Comes a lot of them. Oh, of course, different languages, of course. Cool. That mounting template, that actually might be quite useful because you can mount this. Even though it's really designed to sit on a table, you can potentially ceiling mount it if you needed to. All that there. In here we get the mounting bracket and the AC adapter. We'll talk about this in a second. It's a slight downside with this camera, but I've got a workaround. Mounting screws, and then under here we should have the camera itself. So yep, there we go. There's the Reolink E1 Zoom. So as I've said, this is a standards compliant, ONVIF compliant camera. So it can easily be used with any other NVR. Most of these kind of pet type cameras aren't like that. They're generally lockdown devices that either record locally or to some sort of cloud, and I definitely didn't want that. I wanted a device that I could take out the box, connect to my network without any kind of apps or accounts, and just get a standard NVR pulling video off of it. And that's what this allows. It's a fairly neat little thing. I'm not completely sold on the look of it. There are other PTZ cameras like this that I do prefer the look of, but this was the only one that was Ethernet and ONVIF compliant, so that's why I've gone for it. But yeah, you've got a lens that can move up and down, and it can turn on its axis there, and yeah, that's kind of how it works. And the lens is zoomable, so it will zoom as well. Bit of plastic film on the front, so I may as well peel that off. There's a lens under there, and the 5 megapixel resolution should be really good. Now, taking a look around the back, we can see the connectivity, where we see we've not only got a DC input, but we also have an Ethernet port. And that's what sold me on these. Because even though my kitchen camera is Wi-Fi, the other 2 cameras are in a position where I can easily wire them in. And I'd much rather use wired cameras. The kitchen camera is only Wi-Fi currently as well because the camera I have, which is a Unify G3 Micro, I think, can only do Wi-Fi. And it was a review sample, so that's the one I was sent. So that's why that one is in there. But once I've got this in, I'll connect it as Wi-Fi for the start for the kitchen camera, but I'll probably run a cable in to have the kitchen camera hardwired as well. So it's really nice having a camera like this that's a kind of home pet camera type style, not a professional sort of ceiling mounted CCTV camera that still has built-in Ethernet. However, with this, there's one downside, because while this does have an Ethernet port, it's not power over Ethernet capable. So if you were to use this as standard, you would need to plug it into the network over Ethernet and into the mains over this connector here using the supplied AC adapter, which isn't really ideal. Now for my setup, I probably could get power to each camera. I think both of them are on top of a cabinet where there's a socket, so I could actually use the AC adapter. I still want to have these running over PoE. It's just neater to wire. It allows me to centrally cut the power if I do still decide to do that with these cameras. I'm not quite sure if I'll do that in the end. And if I had some sort of UPS, which I don't have currently, but I am vaguely considering, they'd then be battery backed. So I want to ideally power these over PoE. But there is a solution. These particular cameras just take 5 volts DC into this little barrel jack here. And it's an absolutely tiny little jack. In fact, the particular size of this jack is 2.5 by 0.7 millimeters. So that means the outer diameter is 2.5 millimeters, and the inner pin is 0.7 millimeters. So it's absolutely tiny. However, there is a solution to power this over PoE, and it's using these connectors here. So if you haven't seen these before, these are super useful little adapters to have around. They're sold as PoE splitters, a lot of different names for them, and essentially all they do is they take Ethernet and PoE in on a jack here, and then provide you with a separate network and power connection. And these are available in a bunch of different voltages. So the particular model I've gone for here is a 5 volt one. As you can see on the back, it says 5 volts. So you need to make sure you get the right voltage. You do also get switchable ones, but I wouldn't really recommend those because they're easy to accidentally switch to the wrong voltage. So this is a 5 volt one, which is fine for this camera. So it'll take in full regular standard PoE and output network and 5 volts DC on this barrel jack. Now, of course, this barrel jack is not going to fit in the camera. This is, I think, a 5.5 by 2.5 jack, something like that. But you can easily enough get these little tip adapters that adapt from that to that. So I've got these little adapters here. These are all very inexpensive, so that'll plug onto that there, and then we can connect that Ethernet connection into the camera, the DC jack into the DC jack on the camera. That's it there. Plug PoE and network into that. The camera will get network and power up all over that single cable. So while it's not the neatest solution, these are going to be sitting on top of cabinets high up, so I'm not going to see this at all. And these are a relatively inexpensive way to add PoE to an otherwise non-PoE type camera. They're actually really useful devices to have. You can use them even for Raspberry Pis. You can get ones that rather than having a barrel jack have a micro USB connector. They're very, very versatile little devices. The only other thing to bear in mind is that not all of these are wired for gigabit. This one here is a cheaper one, so as you can see, if you look at the jack, it's only got 4 wires in it, so it is only wired for 100 meg Ethernet. That's absolutely fine for this camera. It's only a 100 meg camera anyway. But if you are buying these for, say something like a Raspberry Pi, it's worth making sure you buy one that is gigabit capable. Well, generally, the gigabit ones will explicitly state that they're gigabit. So just make sure if you do need the gigabit speeds to go for one that does support gigabit, but I don't need that here. So yeah, that's the camera. We've got the Reolink E1 zooms, and these PoE adapters, so we can power them over PoE. Next up, let's talk about the NVR. And I'll be using this little Dell Optiplex 5070 Micro Mini PC. And these are an absolutely brilliant option for running Blue Iris. Because they're relatively small form factor, they've got super low power consumption, but they are relatively powerful. This particular model here has an Intel i5 9500T, so it's a 9th gen i5. The T is a low power model, so it's the slightly lower TDP version, but it's still a 6-core CPU with an Intel iGPU, so that supports all the kind of Intel QuickSync hardware acceleration that will be required for video transcoding. The particular machine I have here then also has 8 gigs of RAM, a small M.2 PCIe SSD. I think it's maybe either 128 or 256 gig, I'm not sure, but that'll be absolutely fine to boot the OS. And then these also have a space to put a 2.5-inch hard drive, so I can put a regular 2.5-inch hard drive in this for video storage. And what's great with these machines is that you can pick these up super cheaply. I picked this machine up here on eBay for about £200. You can get these really cheap because they're used in so many companies who get rid of them after a few years. The warranties run out, they get rid of them, they sell them off in super cheap, in bulk quantities, and you can pick these up very cheaply. So yeah, I paid £200 for this machine, which was a ridiculously good price. I mean, not even for Blue Iris, these are great for little home servers and stuff like that. So yeah, that's what we have here. And then the other reason I've gone for this, rather than building something or getting a little NUC or a little cheap mini PC, is because these include a Windows license. Because, somewhat unfortunately, Blue Iris is Windows software. Frigate, on the other hand, is Linux-based, so you could run that on a Linux machine, but again, Blue Iris does seem to be the better option according to people, but it needs to run on Windows. And the benefit with these machines is that they generally include a Windows license. You ideally want to check, because I think they can sometimes be bought from Dell without a Windows license, but generally speaking, these will include a Windows license, which, if you're building it yourself, you'd be paying over £100 for Windows anyway, so pick up a machine with a Windows license for £200 makes a lot of sense. They also generally include a Pro version of Windows, the Windows Pro license, which is required for RDP. And because I want to be able to remote desktop into this to manage it, I'll need the Windows Pro license. So yep, this comes with the Windows license, so I can install Windows 11 on this, or Windows 11 Pro on this, and also manage it remotely. So these machines are an absolutely brilliant option. So I'll probably just use this machine basically as its stock configuration with 8 gigs of RAM. That should be enough, but we will need more storage. So what I'll also do is I'll add in this 1TB hard drive, just to give it 1TB of storage to store videos. So there you go. That's hardware we'll be using for this. So what I'll now do is I'll get this NVR built up. So we'll do that on camera. We'll build the NVR, get Blue Iris installed, connect up a camera, try and get a camera working with it, And once that's working, I'll go around and get all the cameras installed in their final location, and we can see it working. So here we have the little machine. These are absolutely brilliant, neat little machines. So as you can see on the front, they've got a few different ports. I'm basically going to use none of the I/O in this other than network and power. So around the back, you've got various USB ports, display ports, power, network. But again, this is basically going to be used almost like a server, which is absolutely fine. So let's open this up. So what's great with these machines is they're also really serviceable. They're very toolless design. So there's just a little thumb screw in the back to open up. That opens up like that. And the cover will just slide off like that. What I'll also do while I'm in here is this Dell logo. This is completely pedantic, but it's quite cool. Is because I'm going to have this sitting horizontally on a 1U rack shelf, you can actually rotate this logo like you used to be able to do on a PlayStation 2. So I can, in theory, just pop this forward like that and rotate the logo around just so I can have it the right way up when it's sitting on a shelf. That's quite nice. Bit pointless, but quite a nice little feature. And here we have the inside of the machine. I absolutely love these little things. So here we have a hard drive bay, so we can pop that out there. That's the hard drive bay, so we'll install our hard drive into that. So it's going to go connector side this way. So yeah, that way up there. So we're going to install it like that. Let's get the hard drive into this little caddy adapter. Like that. That's our hard drive ready to go in. May as well take a look at what else we have. So as you can see, under where the hard drive is, we've got the SSD and this little Wi-Fi card. So the Wi-Fi card is an Intel Wi-Fi card of some sort. 9560N, I think, 9560 NGW. I'm not going to use Wi-Fi. I may as well leave it in there. I suppose I could take it out if I wanted rid of it. Then here we have the standard SSD. So it's an SK Hynix SSD, 256 gig, and it is an NVMe drive. It's a basic DRAM-less SSD, but it'll be absolutely fine for what this thing's doing. Then under here we have obviously got the CPU. This little cover comes off, so that lifts the CPU cooler out, sort of blower-style cooler. And then we have the heatsink there, which covers the CPU, which is it's a low-power part, but it's still a socketed desktop CPU. And then here we have the RAM, so we've got a single 8 gig stick of DDR4 RAM. I could upgrade that if I really wanted to, but it's going to be absolutely fine for what I'm doing here. So now let's get this back together and get Windows and Blue Iris installed. So let's just stick that piece back in there. That'll go in. Get the hard drive in, like that. That'll then slide back onto that connector, like that. That's now locked in. And we can put the case on. And with that, I've built my NVR. That was pretty easy. These machines are absolutely brilliant for serviceability. Okay, so I've now got the machine all set up, and I've installed Windows 11 Pro. So that's now working, and I've performed a few initial configuration steps. First of all, I've enabled remote desktop. So I've got remote desktop enabled on this machine, which means I can connect in from my laptop. So this laptop is connected to this machine over remote desktop. I need to do this because it's going to be installed in a network cabinet in my hallway, and I want to be able to manage it without having to take it out the cabinet. So I can now connect in over RDP and manage it. I've also disabled sleep within Windows because obviously I wouldn't want this thing to go to sleep. And then I've changed the setting in the BIOS so that it will automatically turn on whenever mains power is applied. This is quite important because with a standard PC, if it loses power and the power comes back, the PC will stay off, which I don't want. Instead, I want it so that as soon as mains power is applied to this, it will automatically turn on. This means that in the event of a power cut, it will turn itself back on automatically. Almost all motherboards and machines will have a setting for that in the BIOS, and if you're planning on using it as a server, it's a very important setting to enable. The final thing I've done is I've formatted that hard drive. So we've got the C drive there, that 250 gig SSD. That was already set up when I installed Windows. So I've also formatted that other drive as the D drive. That's the 1 terabyte hard drive that will be used for storing recordings. So with all that ready, now we need to install Blue Iris. So I'll show the basic setup process on camera just in case people want to use this as a tutorial. But there's other videos out there showing much more in-depth videos of setting Blue Iris up. Plus those people have probably actually used it before, so they'll be familiar with it, whereas I have really no idea what I'm doing here. So we've got the installer downloaded there. I've already bought Blue Iris and I've got a product key for it, so I suspect at some point it's going to ask me for the product key to activate it. Prior to this, I have actually tested Blue Iris, I think actually on this laptop. Just check it out because they do give you a trial, but if you want to use it long term, you need to buy a license. So go through the install process. Go various dependencies. I'll just let this run and I'll come back once the setup's complete. Cool, that's the install complete. So in theory, we can now launch Blue Iris. So let's see if this works. Okay, so that's now us in Blue Iris. So it's asked me to activate, so I can go next. And then we need to put a product key in here. So I'll put the product key in, click next, and then we'll go through the rest of the setup. Cool, there we go. So I put the product key in, press next, and it activated it. So that's now working. So press finish, and up comes Blue Iris in theory. So we'll just let this run and see what happens. Okay, so the app's now loaded. It asks me if I want to allow it through the firewall. This will be because Blue Iris also has a web interface. So even though it has a desktop Windows interface you can use it through, it's probably a bit more feature complete, it does also have a web interface that I'll probably end up using to manage this most of the time. So yeah, now we're in Blue Iris. So it's now saying to press the plus button at the top right, which is there to add a camera. So in theory, if I press that, I can now pick a camera, put an IP address in, all that sort of stuff. So I'll go away, get a camera powered up, and then go in here and try and get this set up with some cameras. And then I'll come back and take a look at it working. And we're back, and I've now got it all up and running. So I've added two cameras, obviously one of them's disconnected, the other one's sitting here. So what I'll do is I'll quickly demonstrate how I set the camera up, talk about the sort of setup process, explain a few bits of it, and then I'll go away off camera and set up the other camera, get them all installed, get it all set up, and then we'll come back after I've used it a while and talk about my experience. But yep, we've got a couple of cameras added, so let's talk about how we add the cameras. So the first thing I needed to do was set the cameras up themselves. So I did that through the Reolink web interface, so that's over here. Took each camera out of the box, set it up, changed the admin password, and updated it to the latest firmware. And then went and set a static IP address so I can manage it, and the IP addresses aren't going to change because, of course, Blue Iris needs to connect out to the cameras, so a static IP address made sense. And then went to the Reolink settings, and there's a few settings in here I've changed. So first of all, I've changed these OSD settings. By default, the Reolink camera embeds things like the text and the date and time on the video feed, and it also embeds a ridiculously big Reolink logo. So I've turned all of that off here, and instead I'm setting up the overlays in Blue Iris itself. This means that the way it works with Blue Iris is I can actually then, when I'm exporting the video from Blue Iris, I can choose whether I want it to include the overlays or not. Whereas here, if the overlays are baked into the video feed, there's no way to ever remove that from the recording, so it made sense to do that in Blue Iris. I also set this anti-flicker thing here to 50 Hz. Don't know if it really make any difference, but may as well have that switched on. And then I went into settings for stream. So under the stream settings here, you have these two different streams. There's the main stream, which they're calling high, and low, which is like the sub-stream or the fluent stream. The way this works, you have two different streams of video coming from the camera. One that's full quality, or at least very high quality, with a high bit rate and high resolution, and another lower quality stream. We'll talk about where we're using these later, but yeah, you have these two different streams from the camera. So what I did is I went into the high stream, and I maxed out the bit rate, just because I think it was set slightly lower, so I've maxed out the bit rate. I've also dropped the frame rate from 20 frames a second to 15 frames a second. A couple of reasons. First of all, because it's a constant bit rate, I have a feeling, and I'm pretty sure it would be the case, that by recording at a lower frame rate, because you've got the same bit rate but less frames, you're going to have better quality per frame. But more importantly, the substream can only go up to 15 frames a second. And I'll explain how I'm recording both of these together later, but if those have different frame rates, there's a risk that you'll end up losing bits of the recording or things won't quite sync up. And I'll talk about this when I talk about how I'm recording all this. So I've dropped it down to 15 frames a second just so they're matched between the two streams. I then changed this iframe interval. I can't quite remember what this does. This is the keyframe interval, so how often a keyframe is sent. There was something about you want to set this to 1 times because otherwise you can end up with like delays with detecting motion events and stuff within Blue Iris. I think it only detects motion on keyframes or something like that. So I want to set this down to 1 times, which is the lowest it can go, just to get that proper responsiveness. I can't quite remember all the logic on that. If you're really interested, you want to look that up and find someone that actually understands Blue Iris explaining that. But yeah, I want to set that to 1 times. As for the substream or the fluent stream, did the exact same thing. Realistically, I just set the iframe interval to 1 times, and I set the maximum bit rate, which is 512 kilobits a second. So you can see the difference in bit rates between these two streams. The main stream has 10 times the bit rate of the substream. With that set up, I then sort of named the camera here. I don't know if that's super important because I'm not actually overlaying it, but at least it means if I'm logging into the web interface, I can see what camera I'm connected to. Went to network settings here. This is where I've set things like the IP address and stuff. So that's static IP and everything set up there. We're connected to Ethernet, no Wi-Fi connected. Under advanced, I disabled UID, which I think is a sort of cloud connectivity for Reolink's app. I mean, I'm not going to set that up anyway, and I haven't set that up, but there's no point having it talking out to the cloud. Even though these will be on an isolated VLAN that won't have internet access, so it doesn't really make a difference. But I disabled that anyway, just, I suppose the CPU in this means it isn't trying to connect out to Reolink, so that might free up some CPU load, I suppose. Then under server settings, this is quite important, because you come into here and enable RTSP and ONVIF. These are what you need to enable if you want to connect from a third-party NVR. So by enabling both of those, I can then connect to the camera from Blue Iris. So with that out of the way, we're basically fully set up in the Reolink web interface. So now if we come over to Blue Iris, this is where we'd add the camera. So I'm not going to add another camera on video here, but I'll just kind of show how I did it. So here's the Blue Iris interface, and my first impressions are, once you figure it out, it's fine, but it's really not intuitive as a first-time person. If you're coming at this, having not watched tutorials, not read instructions, and you're just trying to figure it out as you go along. Coming from something like Unify Protect, it was dead easy to set up, didn't even need the instructions, just set it up and got it working. With Blue Iris, it's just a little bit fiddly. For example, if you want to add a camera, you're like, where do I do this? You're going to settings, is there a camera management area? No. There's a plus button up here for add camera. So it's little things like that where it's a little bit confusing. And then like to change the camera settings, you pick the camera that you want from here, you select whichever camera it is you want to highlight, then this button here is the settings for that particular camera that you've got highlighted by clicking on it here. And then this gear icon here is the global settings for Blue Iris. So it's, once you figure it out, it makes sense, but it is a little bit fiddly and it's not that intuitive out of the box. And in fact, when I've actually been making this video, you might be able to spot the timestamp on this clock. There's been about a month between the last time I did anything with this project and me filming this section now. I've just not had time, I've just been busy. So I got to the point where I said, right, I'm going to go and set up some cameras, and it's been about a month before I actually came and started using it again. And even in that month, I've forgotten how to use this, and I had to sit for about an hour or half an hour just refreshing myself on how to use this before I could come and actually make this video, because it just wasn't that intuitive and I couldn't get my head around it again. I had to properly sit and try and pick it up again. So imagine if you set this up all the time, or you're constantly in and out if you're changing stuff, it makes sense, and I'm sure once I've used this enough, I'll be able to do it with my eyes closed and won't even need to think. But it does take a little bit of learning. It's not super intuitive. But anyway, so to add the camera, we would press the plus button up here, name the camera, pick network, IP, it's obviously not a analog or USB camera or anything, enable audio if you want audio, enable motion detection if you want motion detection, and then here you have an option for direct to disk recording. And this is quite important. If you don't enable this, what will happen is Blue Iris will receive the video feed and it will transcode it on the CPU and then write it to disk. And now this machine does have a fairly powerful CPU and it's got Intel QuickSync and everything, so it should be pretty good at doing that, but it's fairly unnecessary for it to be transcoding the video footage. So instead, if you enable direct to disk recording, which is what I'm using, it'll take that video stream and just write it straight to disk without transcoding it. It'll still do things like read the video feed for doing motion detection, and it can still insert the overlays, because what it does is it actually stores the overlays separately from the video, and it only overlays it on the actual video file if you try and export a file to a file you want to copy somewhere else. So by enabling the direct to disk recording, that massively reduces CPU load, which will also reduce heat and power consumption. So I'm doing that here. So you then go into this here, you press OK, and it pulls up this screen, which is where you fill in all the camera settings. So rather than doing that again here, I'll go into one of the existing cameras and we'll take a look at the settings in there just to see how I've configured it. So we go there, video, configure, and here we have the same page that we just had. So on this page, you'd want to add the camera's IP address, username and password, and you want to pick the make as being generic /onvif, and then RTSP, and then this is the model. So you can come in here and pick things like Reolink, but you wouldn't want to do that because it's an ONVIF compliant camera, so it's standards compliant. You don't need to pick some sort of proprietary camera protocol in here, so you want to pick generic /onvif. The only other thing you need to do here is then set the port of RTSP and ONVIF to the ones that match the camera settings. I think 554 was the same port as the camera, but the ONVIF port by default was different, so I had to set that to 8000 to match what the camera was, or I could update the camera to match Blue Iris' default. Either way works. And then all you do is press find/inspect, and this figures everything else out. So this will pull in all the other settings, the streams, all that kind of stuff. I think when I first set this up, it didn't pick up the substream, but all I had to do was click into there and then click substream from there. So that worked there. And with that, the camera's then all kind of set up and pulled into Blue Iris and start sending a video in. Once that's set up, there's a bunch of other options you can set up on the camera. So for example, you can set up the trigger. So this is where you set up how it triggers in terms of motion events. The way it works is you have a concept of a trigger and an alert. A trigger is something like a motion event, so you can set that up in here. You can configure your motion events, various sensitivities, all that kind of stuff. You can also set how long that trigger lasts. So for example, if it hasn't been re-triggered, so it hasn't detected more motion, it'll end after 60 seconds. And the maximum you can have a trigger is, say, 300 seconds. That's completely configurable. A trigger is just a motion detection event that marks up on the timeline showing that there's a trigger at that point. An alert is then where it will actually tell you. So you can say like how often it can re-trigger or re-alert you, whether it has to be a new alert or if the same alert, same trigger happening multiple times can trigger multiple alerts. I've not set up any kind of alerts yet. I really need to play with all this, but that's how it works. A trigger is like a motion detection event, and an alert is kind of what it does with that event. So set up a trigger here for motion detection, and that all works. And then what you have is the record settings. And this is where I had to do a fair bit of learning and figure out how this works, because it's very different to Unify Protect. I think this stuff is fairly normal for most conventional CCTV systems, but it's something I hadn't really dealt with before. Because when I first set this up, it started recording, and then I realised I was recording a 5 megabit stream. And if I factor in that I have 3 of these cameras, each outputting a 5 megabit stream, with a 1 terabyte hard drive in this machine, I'd only really be able to record about a week of continuous video without filling that disk up. And that's not really enough, because with this setup, I want to be able to at least record, say, 2 weeks of video. Essentially, I want long enough for it to be able to record the full time that I'm away on, say, a long holiday. If I'm away for 2 weeks, that's probably the longest I'd ever be away. I want this to be able to have full footage of that 2-week holiday, because it means if I come back and something's happened and I've not been checking the footage while I'm away, I'll still have all the footage stored. So being able to record that 5 megabit stream just wouldn't really work. And I was thinking, well, how does Unify do it? Because that CloudKey had a 1 terabyte hard drive and that could record for ages. Well, it's because Unify uses variable bitrate recording. So when there's not much motion happening or not much happening in the video stream, it drops that bitrate right down and records a very low bitrate. And if more motion happens in the video or the scene gets a bit more complicated, the bitrate will increase. And that makes a lot of sense, and it actually works pretty well. I mean, this video I'm filming right now is recorded on a variable bitrate in my camera. It's a constant quality codec. However, it seems that most conventional CCTV systems don't actually do variable bitrate recording. Instead, they operate at a constant bitrate. So in this case, it's a 5 megabit a second stream. So that got a little bit tricky, because I was thinking, how do I record for long enough? Well, this is where you can see this option here for video, and you have when triggered, when alerted, continuous, triggered and periodic, continuous sub and alerts, and continuous sub plus triggered. Now I won't go into all of these, but by default it's set to continuous, which means it records that 5 megabit stream continuously. I could set it to when triggered or when alerted, but that would mean I would only ever record footage when motion's detected. And I don't really want that, because sometimes you might want to see the motion leading up to something, or in the run out after something's happened, or if a motion event doesn't trigger, you might still want some sort of footage. So I still want to be able to continuously record. And this is where continuous sub plus triggered works. What this means is that the camera will continuously record that substream. So instead of recording the 5 megabit a second stream, it records a 500 kilobit a second stream, which is obviously much smaller, and I can store loads of that. So it records that substream continuously, and then if there's a trigger, so if there's a motion event, it will then start recording this full high quality stream. So what it'll do is, if you look in the trigger settings, we can see I've set up the trigger to end after 30 seconds, after 60 seconds if there's no more motion, and it'll run up to a maximum of 300 seconds, so that's how long it'll record for, and it'll record that full quality stream. On this tab, on the record tab, there's also an option for the pre-trigger record time that I've set to 30 seconds. So what this means is the system will buffer that full quality stream for 30 seconds, and at any point if motion is detected, it will start by saving that last 30 seconds before the motion trigger, and then continue recording the full quality stream. So it means that if there's a motion event, I can see 30 seconds before the motion event happened in full quality, as well as the full motion event in full quality. I'll need to play about with these settings over time and see how I get on, but that's kind of how it works. Now, it's maybe not quite as nice as having variable bitrate recording just from a convenience perspective, but I suppose you do have the benefit that there's no issues where the bitrate doesn't quite increase high enough, or you have all kind of issues or the bitrate kind of gets stuck. I don't know. It just seems like most sort of conventional CCTV systems like this tend to use constant bitrate, and Unify Protect uses variable bitrate, so don't know why that's not more common to use variable bitrate, but this is kind of how I've been able to figure it out. I'll play with it and see how I get on. If I find it just doesn't really play well or work for me, I can just buy a bigger hard drive. Realistically, if I bought a 4 terabyte hard drive for this, that would be absolutely plenty. I'd easily be able to record 2 weeks of footage, but obviously I already had these 1 terabyte hard drives spare, so I may as well just use that. But if it becomes an issue, I'll buy a bigger hard drive and just record in full quality to that. But I'll try this continuous sub plus triggered, because it should be absolutely fine. So yep, that's all set up there, and now we're recording. So I'll take a look at the actual Blue Iris interface later on once it's set up and I've been using it for a while, because I'll actually have a bit more experience with it. But yep, it's working. You see it's recording in the bottom. You see we have the two cameras. Obviously this one's not connected right now. That's the camera working there. And the final thing we have is the PTZ functionality, because this really confused me before I could figure out how it worked. And now, again, it's one of those things, it's like the Blue Iris web interface. Once you figure it out, it makes sense, but until you figure it out, you have no idea what's going on. So in Blue Iris, you have this section here for PTZ control. And out of the box, you can say pick a camera, and then you can use these arrows to adjust the camera. So you can tilt it back and forward, and that works. Now, one thing you might be noticing here is that this video is a really slow frame rate updating. It's only updating at 1 frame a second. This is because I'm connected into the machine over remote desktop. There's a setting in Blue Iris that you could disable if you needed to, that for remote desktop connections, it drops the frame rate of all the cameras down to 1 frame a second. And that kind of makes sense, because otherwise, if you go into remote desktop and you had all these cameras running at a full 15, 20 frames a second, it could really slow down your remote desktop session. Especially if you're remoting in over a VPN, over a dodgy connection, and you need to change some settings. If all these cameras were there and it completely tanked your RDP connection, that could get quite annoying. So by default, it will drop all the frame rates down on RDP connections. So that's fine, because for me to actually view the video remotely, I'll be using the web interface. But yeah, if you want to use Blue Iris and you want to use it remotely, you're either going to need to use the web interface or change that setting to be able to get the full frame rate over RDP. So yeah, when you see these frame rates being really juddery right now, that's just because I'm over RDP. But yeah, you've got these pan to zoom settings here, so you can pan the camera like that. Likewise, you've got options here to zoom in and zoom out. Again, it's very slow, but you can see what it's doing there. But then over here, you've got these presets. And these were just something I couldn't figure out. I could not figure out how to get these to work. But then I finally figured it out. So what you actually need to do is you don't set these presets up in Blue Iris. You set these up on the camera, and then Blue Iris just triggers them. And that does actually make a lot of sense, but yep, you need to set these up on the camera. So to do that, you're going to go over to the camera, go to the PTZ section here, and what you'll do is you'll adjust the camera to the position where you want that preset. Once you've adjusted it, you adjust all the position settings here. You can adjust the zoom as well if you want. Go to the preset section, press plus, and then you can give it a name. So now we can see here we have two different presets. There's privacy and home. I'll need to adjust these when I actually get the cameras out live, but what I want to have here is a privacy setting where the camera is completely turned around, looking at a wall or looking at the ceiling, not filming the room, and the home position where the camera will point to when I'm actually wanting to record footage. It'll turn around and point into the room. So for all my cameras, I'll have these two positions, and of course I could set up others as well. Then in Blue Iris, what you then do is when you first import the camera config, so when you come into here, into video, configure, and you run this find/inspect, that will download all of those preset positions. If you were to come in later on and you wanted to add more, you'd add them into the camera and either come back into here and press find/inspect, and again it would pull all those down again, or you can go into PTZ control, edit presets, and you can manually add those new presets in here. But you need to set the positions up on the camera first and then basically tell Blue Iris that they exist. So Blue Iris now knows they exist, but it's the camera that handles the actual positioning. But now those are set up there, we can actually trigger these positions. So as you can see, if I say I want to set it to home, the camera will move to the home position. And if I say I want to move to privacy, the camera will pan round and it'll film the privacy position. Or now of course the privacy position doesn't make sense here because the privacy position is filming into the room, but that makes sense. That's just the camera's not in the final position here, but you can see we move between these two preset positions here just like that. So privacy, and then go back to home, camera will turn around, go back to home, and it will go back down to its home position. So we can now trigger those presets. And this is something I can also do over the Blue Iris API. I need to play with all that to integrate it, but hopefully I should be able to integrate that with my alarm system so that I can have the cameras turn away when I'm at home and turn out into the rooms when I'm away. So we'll need to figure that out. And actually, as you can see down here, this video has now gone red. That's because it's detected motion. And as you can see down here, we're seeing this trigger is occurring. So it's now recording a section here at full quality because it's had a motion event triggered. So yeah, that's set up there. So yeah, that's how the PTZ setup works. So hopefully that made sense. I'm not really going to go into too much detail more than that on how to use Blue Iris, it's very complicated. There's a lot of better videos out there on much better YouTube channels that go into full detail and do really in-depth Blue Iris tutorials. And I think I'm going to have to watch some of those myself because this is quite complicated. But what I'll now do is I'll get the other camera set up, get the NVR installed in the rack, get everything set up. I'll go away and use it for a while, then I'll come back and talk about it once it's all working. And we're back. It's now been a couple of weeks since that last clip, and I've got the system installed, and I've been using it. And I'm really happy with it. Overall performance seems pretty good. The scrubbing performance maybe isn't quite as good as Unify Protect, but it's a lot better than I expected it to be. So I can quite easily scrub through footage, and it does actually work pretty well, even over a VPN. So overall the performance, while maybe not quite as smooth as Unify Protect, is actually much better than I thought it would be, and it actually works pretty well. Definitely a lot better than most other sort of off-the-shelf NVR type solutions I've used. And as you can see, we have the cameras installed. Now, I'm not going to go and show them all, but essentially what they're all the cameras are just installed on top of various bookcases and cabinets, and then pointing out into the rooms. So we can see in the hallway, I've got this one up here, mounted on top of a cabinet. Then the PoE injector is just sitting on top of the cabinet behind that. The cable then runs along, drops down behind the cabinet, there's a bit of space behind it, and it plugs into the network port that's inside the cabinet as well. I've had that network point installed there for years, and I'm finally actually using it for something. So yep, that plugs into the network point that's hidden behind the cabinet. But you may be looking at this and wondering why the camera's pointing in the wrong direction because, well, this isn't exactly useful right now. That's because I've got my privacy setup configured so that the cameras are not going to record when I'm at home. If you watched all my other videos about CCTV, I've kind of demonstrated how I had my old cameras integrated with my alarm system. So when I armed the alarm, it powered on a PoE switch that powered up the cameras, and when I disarmed the alarm, it powered down all the cameras. Well, with this setup, because I have PTZ cameras, I can go a step further and have it set up that when the alarm is disarmed, the cameras will actually turn and point away from pointing into the rooms. So it's clear that the cameras aren't filming you. It's great if you've got guests over, they're not going to have cameras looking at them. The camera's literally turned away. And then when I arm the alarm system, the cameras will turn back to the correct position and film the rooms. So as you can see right now, the camera's pointed away. And if you look in Blue Iris, you can see that all the cameras are showing up as disabled. I'm doing all this over Blue Iris's MQTT API. So I turn the cameras away and then disable them. This means that I'm not mindlessly just recording a video feed pointing at the ceiling, so I'm not wasting storage space. And it also means that I can have the camera set to record audio when I'm away from home without the camera sitting permanently recording audio while I'm at home. So the cameras are disabled in Blue Iris and they're pointing away. But now let's watch what happens if I arm the alarm system. So I'll arm the alarm system off camera, but you'll hear it arming, and then watch what happens. So we'll arm the alarm now. Cameras will all enable. Give it a couple of seconds, and then the cameras will all turn around and point into the rooms. Just like that. And as you can see, the hallway camera is now pointing out into the hallway. Once I'm in here, I can do all the PTZ functionality, so I can come onto the little PTZ control here, and I can pan the camera left, I can pan it right. I can tilt it up if I wanted to, or I can tilt it down. And likewise, I can zoom in and out. It works pretty well, and it's actually pretty easy to use. The only thing you need to bear in mind is there's a bit of latency, so you kind of need to more press it in little bursts to kind of jump to different points and then wait to see where it moved to. You can't just kind of completely keep pressing it, because otherwise you'll end up way overshooting. But you can also set presets, so you have multiple different presets, and you can pick them from this sort of number pad here. So that's also quite useful. And likewise, if I disarm the alarm system, the cameras will all go back to the privacy settings. So if I come back here and disarm the alarm, let's disarm that. The cameras will now turn away, turn back to their privacy position, give it a couple of seconds, and the cameras will then disable within Blue Iris. There we go, got a couple errors in the bottom corner. That's because the camera's now disabled. And then if you go back out to view all the cameras, you'll see they're now all showing up as disabled again. So that works perfectly. And then as for the final part of this setup, we have the Blue Iris NVR installed in my hallway comms cabinet. So I've got this comms cabinet in my hallway cupboard. We've got one new shelf on the top, and the NVR is just sitting up there. And those optiplexes are great because they fit perfectly onto one new shelf. So you can fit a bunch of them into a rack just by using cheap rack shelves. So yep, that's installed up there out of the way, and it works perfectly. So there you go. That's a look at my new Blue Iris CCTV setup. I'm very happy with it. While it's maybe not quite as slick as Unify Protect, it does still work really, really well. And being able to add all this additional functionality in home automation integration to have the PTZ cameras turn away when I'm at home and then turn back into rooms when I'm at home, and have that all built in over the Blue Iris MQTT API, that works absolutely brilliantly, and I'm really happy with it. So there you go. Hopefully you found this interesting or potentially useful if you're trying to do a setup like this yourself. But all I have to say now is thank you very much for watching.